Pokémon is one of the biggest franchises in gaming, but it's also one of the laziest. Pokemon games are stagnant, and here are the 3 games that prove it. You might be wondering what I mean. What's wrong with Pokemon, and who could be making Pokemon-like games? Well, let's start with the basics. What is a Pokemon game? Pokemon games are really just a subset of JRPGs where they emphasize catching and building up Pokemon and de-emphasize pretty much anything else that people do well in RPGs. The core mechanics of Pokemon are Pokemon. Duh, Pokemon is like the core mechanic of Pokemon. But hey, you specifically are catching monsters with different moves and types and abilities. The ability to train and catch these monsters is the main differentiator between Pokemon and a standard JRPG like Final Fantasy. There are tons of Pokemon out there, and some have great designs, and sometimes they let the intrusive thoughts win, and we get the garbage Pokemon. And Wiglet, which is Diglett, but with water. So Wiglet. Yay. Types. The core combat of Pokemon is not too different from other turn-based RPGs, except for types. Every Pokemon has a type, and every attack has a type. Types have strengths and weaknesses. Fire is super effective versus grass, and it's not very effective versus water. The system is really intuitive, at least for the basic types. It makes sense that fire would be effective against bugs, or that electric would be strong against water and have no effect on ground. Now, the system does start to be a lot more confusing when we add stuff like dark. Why are bugs effective against dark? The world may never know. And I get that they added it for balance reasons, but fairy type just makes you scratch your head. As far as I can tell, fairy type just means pink. Anyway, types are core to Pokemon, and not that many games have done them in the same way. Outside the more unique stuff about Pokemon and catching them, Pokemon tends to be one of the most basic RPGs you've ever seen. So y'all want cutscenes? Well, we got the most basic version of those. I can't hate too much on the writing because these games are made for children, but this is the plot of a Pokemon game. You go out on an adventure as an unattended 10-year-old. You know, shout out to your parents for not being helicopter parents. Although maybe they should at least text to make sure you haven't, been eaten by a wild Charizard or something, but whatever. You make a friend and a rival. The friend is usually, super sorry at battling Pokemon. There's a group of evil adults dead set on taking over or straight up destroying the world with world-ending Pokemon. This is not dealt with by the super powerful good guy adults. In fact, the adults in the Pokemon world seem like a bunch of bums for the most part. What does the Pokemon League champion do on Monday through Friday? Because most people can't even get far enough to face them, so they just, chill? Occasionally, they decide to step in and help with the world-ending threat. You have to stop the evil adults while fighting your rival and climbing the Pokemon corporate ladder, which means battling gym leaders. You save the world. Who cares about that saving the world anyway? It's time to beat the bummy champion and become the most powerful person in the country at age 10. Outside of the story, you got the basic stuff with shops and towns and NPCs and even a bit of crafting. These are all some of the worst versions of these features, but they are there. They finally figured out somewhat recently that maybe, just maybe, fast travel should be fast and traversal should be fun. But yeah, standard RPG stuff. The final thing I want to touch on before we go on to the games is to talk about the gameplay loop. What are we doing over and over again in Pokemon? The Pokemon gameplay loop looks something like this. Step 1, you go to a new area. Step 2, we have a Yap Fest. We have some dialogue that's written for an 8-year-old, so it's hard to hate too much, but it's a lot of yapping. Step 3, catch Pokemon. This is cool, although a little repetitive. Usually you have to wade through a horde of Pokemon to get to the ones you have to catch. Step 4, train Pokemon. This part is usually cut out of the newer games, thankfully. You just kind of grind out battles to train up the Pokemon that you caught. Step 5, go do a real thing. You know, the fun part of the game. This is when you go to a gym or clear out some hideout, because as a 10-year-old, it makes sense for you to sneak into the hideout of a criminal group who wants to take over to destroy the world. Whatever. This is when you're using the team Pokemon that you trained, and sometimes you gotta go through a dungeon. Cool. Step 6, boss fight. This is a gym leader, or a rival battle, or an eldritch creature that drags you into a nightmare dimension. And if you don't want to get trapped in the distortion world with DS graphics, make sure to subscribe. And then 7, you loop back around to 1. You go to another new area. Some games will play around with the formula, mostly meaning that we'll insert more Yap sessions between each of the other points. But this is the main gameplay loop, and it's kind of stagnant at this point. We've seen it for 9 generations of games in a row, so you would hope that they would go a little further, but Call of Duty has changed more than Pokemon. There is a lot of stuff that Pokemon has done well, and so people still like the series. But overall, the series is drenched in stagnation. Most of the gameplay mechanics and the gameplay loop has not changed in 5, 10, in some cases 30 years, and they could do better, just like this first game did in many ways. Pal World. Pal World is basically Pokemon Legends Arceus, but without a lot of the Pokemon Company jank. You have pals, which are definitely different than Pokemon. Despite looking like Pokemon, and having types like Pokemon, and being caught in Ball Balls instead of Pokeballs after you hurt them to get them low health. At first, this game looked like a complete joke. It's a Pokemon clone whose claim to fame is having guns. This is something an edgy 12-year-old would come up with. and yet it is actually more engaging than most Pokemon games. The best thing that Power World does is create a better gameplay loop than Pokemon. Now, this is personal preference, but I'm glad it just cuts out the yapping. I'd rather have no story than garbage story. But besides that, most importantly, it extends the gameplay loop. The base building and survival game mechanics give you something to do to take a break from that whole catch and train section before we get to like the core part of the game. Like here's a sample play session of Power World. You build something new to use with your pals, like a new piece of machinery. You then grab some supplies and journey out to a dungeon. You beat the dungeon and return to your base, but then your base is being invaded, so you fight off an invasion. You go up a technology level using the resources you found in the dungeon, and that lets you craft a new pal harness and build a new gun. You grab a new party of pals, including the one that you can throw a harness on now, and you go challenge a tower. There's so much more variation than you see from the normal Pokemon game loop. And the game gives you options, so you can technically ignore most of the things you don't care about, but you have options if you want. Makes Pokemon part of the world. Here, to be fair to Pokemon, we'll compare Power World to Pokemon Legends Arceus because that game does this the best of the actual Pokemon game. We'll give Pokemon its best chance to succeed. In a normal Pokemon game, the Pokemon are here for battling and occasional window dressing or fast travel. Otherwise, they may as well not exist. In Legends Arceus, they are walking around. They hang out in different biomes, you have to sneak up on them, and they can be lured. However, after we catch them, we go right back to normal Pokemon. Your Pokemon either go with you to fight, or they sit forever in the box. Imagine how depressing that life would be.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
You're just chilling. The next thing you know, boom, you're getting jumped, and then you have to hang out in cold storage for the rest of your life. Wouldn't you rather be doing hard labor? Now, to be fair, Power World does take a rather cynical view of pals. On one end of the spectrum, you have Pokemon, where Pokemon are viewed as friends. We have to pamper them, and you have to take care of them. And on the other end, you have Power World, where your pals are put to hard labor at work camps, or they act as cattle, complete with like butchering. Power World is a little extreme, but the big gameplay success is that it actually makes you care more about the average pal. In Pokemon, you're catching Pokemon, and then from there, you have very little use for them. If you catch a Rattata, for the most part, you're not going to do anything with it because you have better options, and outside of fighting, it can't do anything for you. In Power World, I wanted to catch Cativas, which are one of the first pals you see in the game for a long time because they're versatile workers. Every single pal you see gets evaluated because you need someone to keep the food cold, or to keep the lights on, or to work the water wheel. Over time, yes, your usage of pal does narrow, but not before you put almost everything to use. It also makes the game feel a lot more alive. Finally, Power World does exploration with Pokemon much better. The recent two Pokemon games, Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet, added the ability to actually ride your Pokemon to go faster, climb up mountains, fly a little bit, and to traverse the water. This was a great improvement. It's too bad that Power World does it even better. You know that quote, good artists copy, great artists steal? We'll call Power World Robin Hood because it be stealing everything from the big dogs. Not only can you ride pals, but you can also use them as gliders. Totally not copying from Breath of the Wild. And there's mounted combat. This is one of the most interesting parts because, again, it has you considering an even brighter range of pals for regular use. Someone to go on the water, one for speed on the ground, one for fighting on the ground, flying, gliding. Everything about movement is based around pals. Power World is stylistically unique, but it also feels like the completion of the vision of Pokemon Legends Arceus. It does open-world exploratory Pokemon much better than the Pokemon Company does. Now, Power World does a lot of things great, but one thing that's really lacking is turn-based combat. The combat system is something that Pokemon really gets right. However, this next game shows off just how far they have to go with Pokemon's core gameplay, because Pokemon is getting outdone by Pokerogue. Alright, Pokerogue is a Pokemon roguelike. You know, like it's a Rogue. If you don't know what a roguelike is, it's a genre that's built around quick, difficult runs of a game. Whereas Pokemon is a long, drawn-out RPG, Pokerogue can be beaten in a couple of hours, and it's meant for exciting, repeatable gameplay. This seems like a weird match for a game like Pokemon, but it actually turned out really well. For a while, this game was peaking at hundreds of thousands of players. Okay, let me quickly break down how this game works if you're not familiar. Instead of this whole gameplay loop full of yapping and walking around, we skip all of that and we have a series of Pokemon battles. You fight a random Pokemon, which you can catch or not like a regular game. Then you get a reward, like every roguelike ever. Occasionally, you run into bosses that are exactly the same kind as the real game. You fight your rival, and gym leaders, and crime syndicates. One major difference, though, is that if you lose a battle, you gotta start over. You gotta go back to the beginning. Every Pokemon and pretty much every mechanic from Pokemon is in the game, and you get to pick different Pokemon starters, and there's a whole unlock system. Each Pokemon costs a certain amount of points to bring, so you don't just bring the most powerful stuff every time. Honestly, this game seems to have a lot more care given to it than something like Sword and Shield, but there are specific things that this game does way better than your average Pokemon game. It gives you a reason to use more Pokemon. One of the most surprising things about Pokérogue is that a fan-made browser game shows much more care for individual Pokemon than Game Freak does. Every single Pokemon has cool egg moves that can transform what they do. For example, you got something like Pidgey, who's just, bird. Pidgey can learn... Woo! Pidgey can learn Bleak Wind Storm. And Boom Burst. And somehow this Caterpillar can make a blizzard. Every single Pokemon also can get access to passive abilities that open up what they can do. Even crappy Pokemon like Ekans and Meowth are a lot stronger if they get real abilities like Regenerator and Tough Claws. And then there's Shinies, which have always been in the game, but now they actually do something. When you have Shinies on your team, they give you better luck, which means you'll encounter more rare Pokemon and also get better rewards after winning a fight. The only way to get any of these things is to either catch these Pokemon in the game or to hatch them through the egg gacha. Now, usually, we'd be hating on a gacha. Nintendo, if you're watching this, please, look away for a little bit. The last thing we need in Pokemon, which still tries to sell you 2 copies of the same game in 2025, is rampant microtransactions. But because Pokérogue is just a browser-based fan game, there are no microtransactions. You just get the eggs by, playing the game. The thing that's cool about this whole system is it encourages you to use things you would otherwise ignore. One of the first Pokemon I really used in Pokérogue was Chatot. Chatot is the definition of a filler Pokemon in the games. It's just a bird that has a music note on its head. But in Pokérogue, I hatched one with a really powerful move, Boom Burst, which let me blow through the early part of the game. Chatot also levels up faster than other Pokemon. This is completely irrelevant in the main games because XP is designed around children too young to read. I would know, I was one of them. In Pokérogue, there's actual challenge with clearing the early fours, so Chatot was a lifesaver. And there's these little things and stories with hundreds of Pokemon in the game. Which brings me to every single Pokemon has a purpose. First of all, in every run, you want to fill up your team with 6 Pokemon. You can only bring so many Pokemon from the beginning, so you have to make a balanced team on the fly. That means sometimes you just kinda gotta catch and use that seal. Usually, this dumb-looking water boy would be yeeted away at the first opportunity, but here, you might not find another water type for a while. It goes the other way, too. A lot of times, your favorite Pokemon will be straight-up booty in the real game. They don't do anything. Like, as a kid, I always liked how Rapidash looked. I mean, it's a horse with a fire mane. Seriously. But Rapidash is super booty. Outclassed by everything. But in Pokérogue, I have a shiny Rapidash with a crazy moveset and a good passive. Does it make it the most powerful Pokemon ever? No, but it only costs half a point, so it has a niche, a reason to be used. This system directly plays into the fantasy that Game Freak is trying to set up in Pokemon. They want you to have an attachment to a Pokemon more than just viewing them as tools. In Pokérogue, it incentivizes you to both play your favorites and also end up growing to like Pokemon you used to doubt or dislike. I will never like Wormadon, because, come on, it's a bug surrounded by garbage. I don't understand how it got greenlit, but I can kind of respect it now, because somehow, it's one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. Outside of these specifics with the usage of Pokemon, Pokérogue does a good job of streamlining Pokemon gameplay. It drops all the story aspects, so if you're looking for that kind of experience, you're out of luck. Although, again, I don't know why you're looking for that out of Pokemon. However, in return, they turn Pokemon into a much smoother gameplay experience. Just about everything in Pokemon is better used in Pokérogue. We've talked a lot about the Pokemon itself, but items are also a better fit in this game. Potions matter a lot more when you're limited on money and when you can't just go back to a Pokemon Center to heal whenever you want. If you let your Pokemon die, you might just lose your run. Revives are costly and important. The different types of Pokeballs come into use too, because you need to catch Pokemon a lot more often, and you also want to be ready at any time to catch more. If you use all your good Pokeballs to catch a Charmeleon, you're going to be kicking yourself when you run into a random Regigigas. All the other items, even down to berries, are way more impactful, so it makes it a real choice what item you want to get after every battle. Your opponents are also much more relevant in this game. Gym leaders are a jump scare. You're never really sure when they're going to show up, so you have to be ready for that fight at the end of each biome. Evil teams that are mostly a joke in the regular games are actually a challenge because of how much they stretch your resources. And rival battles are the most stressful of all. Somehow, your rival just, catches a Rayquaza, good for her, but that's crazy. All the Pokemon gimmicks, except for Z moves, which, fair enough, are here, and they all have uses. It's really exciting to get a Mega Bracelet because then you have the option of your run being transformed. But again, the roguelike gameplay loop is amazing at forcing you to get the most out of mechanics. At the end of a battle, you might get a random Dynamax brand, and now all of a sudden you're looking for a different set of Pokemon than you were before, just so you can take advantage of it. Overall, Pokérogue is the freshest take on the Pokemon formula we've seen in a long time, and it's being done completely for free. Almost nothing in this game is brand new, it's all repurposed and refreshed content. It just goes to show how much is being left on the table in this franchise. The last game to do Pokemon better than Pokemon was hard to choose. We've covered a lot of things that Pokemon does poorly and how other games beat it, but there's still something missing from that original gameplay loop. Honorable mention to indie games like Cassette Beasts or Coromon. They're both serviceable games, and they do some things better than Pokemon. However, these both feel a little closer to knockoffs than improvement. Because while Palworld and Pokerogue both took a ton from Pokemon, they spun the game in crazy ways that made it a lot better. These other games are a lot more like Pokemon if you don't have a Switch. I want to give an honorable mention to Digimon, which is mind-blowing. This game has always been the king of Pokemon knockoffs. I've always seen it as Pokemon, but cheesier, which is crazy because Pokemon already has like this in it.
What?
But the Digimon series of games has done a better job of progressing over the years in terms of story. I can't believe I'm saying this. Digimon is trying on story, but these games take the story to a different place than you are 10 years old and you must travel the country battling full-grown adults that are somehow sorry at their full-time jobs. And also stop the Al Capone of Pokemon while you're at it. This does touch on the part that we've been missing, though. Neither Palworld nor Pokerogue has much of a story. Turns out they decided to steal that part from Pokemon as well. So the third game that does Pokemon better than Pokemon is Metaphor Refan. Let's just say Metaphor. Metaphor is technically a standalone game, although really it's the latest Persona game, which means it's the latest. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. These games all feature the monster fighting and taming aspects of Pokemon, although to different extents per game. In Metaphor, you're a guy trying to win an election, which happens to involve a lot of fighting and monsters. So pretty realistic. All these games also put a lot of emphasis on the story and the characters, more so than Pokemon. In Metaphor, the game is running on a strict calendar. Every day you can choose whether to go fight a dungeon, or to go hang out in the spa, or to spend time with one of your friends. We'll cover more of that later. This means the game actually has a pretty similar gameplay loop to Pokemon with some key changes. Number 1, go to a new area. This is the same. Number 2, Yap Fest. The dialogue is better and the story has more stakes, but it is still a Yap Fest. Number 3, we then skip right to the go do a real thing part. We actually just keep staying in this loop, doing real stuff where you're fighting dungeons or progressing in relationships or whatever, until it's time to, number 4, do a real boss fight. Without getting into too much detail, this is also pretty similar. A lot of times you're fighting a rival.
Don't tax the young, bankroll the elderly. Those too old to work will know prosperity under my rule.
Or a criminal, or an eldritch nightmare creature. So about the same. Then number 5, we loop back around to number 1. With that in mind, the first way that Metaphor outdoes Pokemon is with elemental typing. Metaphor outdoes Pokemon's combat in one core way, the elemental weakness system. Water beats fire, fire beats grass, blah, blah, blah. This all matters, but after a certain point, it starts to matter a lot less. On paper, if you use fire against water, it does half as much damage. But if you have strong enough Pokemon, you can start to just ignore the typing system altogether. This is especially true when you're just going through the story. You can just have your best Pokemon spam their strongest moves, and it will work out pretty well. You can beat pretty much the entire game like this. Metaphor also has an elemental typing system of sorts. In this game, units don't really have types, but they have just weaknesses and resistances. Except the game really incentivizes you to play around the system. If you hit your enemy's weakness, you get an extra turn. If you miss your attack or hit an immunity, you lose a turn. This is huge for making you turn on your brain rather than just spamming your strongest attack. This is even kind of a problem in Pokerogue. In that game, you can just spam really strong attacks that hit both enemies in double battles and basically ignore typing altogether. In Metaphor, the entire combat system revolves around properly hitting the right types. The biggest thing that Metaphor and games like it do better than Pokemon is to have a story that's not terrible. I want to showcase this by directly comparing Metaphor to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now look, Scarlet and Violet look bad. Like, the graphics are really bad. And these games got dunked on when they released because of the graphics. They got dunked on hard. But I want to stress that despite that, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are actually some of the better attempts at storytelling that the series has to offer. And you'll see why in a minute. The first way that Metaphor mogs Pokemon in storytelling is in the gameplay loop. Pokemon basically just shoves yapping into the middle of your gameplay to mix things up. This might work better if the yapping was any good, so you had any incentive to actually read any. Scarlet and Violet is prime press A real estate. But there's very little elegance to how the storytelling and yapping is connected to the game itself. Metaphor, on the other hand, has storytelling as a key part of the gameplay loop. You spend roughly 1/3 of your time getting to know your teammates and exploring locations. A lot of this stuff is drip-fed rather than dumped on you all at once. Funnily enough, Scarlet and Violet also tried to do some of these things. The strongest part of the game comes at the very end. You have to beat all 8 of the gym leaders, then become the Pokemon champion, so like King of Pokemon World. I don't know, it's not really explained what that means. And then you have to beat all of the Pokemon Kaiju, which you have to do so you can make sandwiches for a sick dog. No, I didn't make that up. They were trying. And you have to beat a group of Pokemon bullies who were actually kind of chill. IDK, that whole plotline just didn't really work. But if you did all that, you unlock Area Zero, which had the best music, and wouldn't you know it, it looked like a regular RPG. You have your party members moving with you, and they have a little side talk, a directly worse version of the feature you'll see in like Persona or Metaphor, but they were trying. Area Zero also does environmental storytelling. The haunting music and strange Pokemon do a lot to communicate the unnaturalness of Area Zero. You feel out of place, and this whole area is exciting to explore. I wish they had, made the whole game feel like this, and that's what you get in Metaphor. The combat exploration parts of Metaphor are just a superior version of those found in Scarlet and Violet. You can also see an attempt made in Scarlet and Violet to do storytelling with individual characters, but it also falls on its face. You even have like a relationship system, which is halfway built. I mean, apparently after this conversation, I became slightly closer with Nurse Miri. But this doesn't actually do anything, and there's nothing deeper than this. You just go through some conversations, says you got closer, and that's it. And the characters don't acknowledge this afterwards either. It's like you didn't know each other. Whereas in Metaphor, this is a core part of the overall narrative to the story, and it's also directly tied to your gameplay progression. You can't unlock more archetypes, which are the equivalent to Pokemon, without building up your relationship with other characters. This is the kind of thing that Pokemon would really benefit from. It would give you a reason to keep playing. Beyond that, I'm shocked that the Pokemon games don't have a similar system for building up a connection to your own Pokemon. There's a friendship system where you can build up your relationship with your Pokemon, but they don't really do anything with it. There should be more mechanics to tie you to your Pokemon, especially since they spend so much time talking about Pokemon are your friends. Overall, Metaphor really shows how much is left on the table in Pokemon when it comes to storytelling. They just don't even try. There's so much you can do with so little effort. So Palworld, Pokerogue, and Metaphor all show the many ways the Pokemon Company could do better. We know they probably won't. I mean, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was a top 10 selling game of its year, and it had this in it. It's just so frustrating to watch a series you like drop the ball so consistently. Anyways, thanks for watching.